welcome to Neutral Ground with Johnny Wakeland. I'm not neutral what the ground is. Anybody can come on here and say anything they like and debate with me. I'm happy to have them engage. But for now, click the bell to get notifications and click on the subscribe button. All right, let's get into this. So this is a message for our friends south of the border. Thank you for supporting our truckers, both financially, morally, and frankly, through paying attention to what's happening up here. I particularly want to thank Tucker Carlson at Fox News for keeping the heat on Justin Trudeau, who's turning out to be a fascist, as we all knew, like his father was. They're taking gasoline and jerry cans away from people. It's well below zero. It's freezing up here, and they're literally trying to make protesters freeze in their trucks. I talked to someone who said that they're actually returning jerry cans with water mixed with the fuel to damage the trucks. The police, I heard, are doing that. I've heard from truckers that say that there's all kinds of dirty tricks, that they were putting X-Lax. This is a trucker who told me this. They're putting X-Lax in food. So the truckers are now only getting the food from specific people they trust. Is this the action of a responsible government? Is this the action of police forces in a normal country? Putting X-Lax in people's food, putting water in diesel fuel to damage other people's properties, waiting years for our friends south of the border to pay attention to what's happening in Canada. We need help. The reason that we populists cannot get anywhere in this country is we don't have a free media. We have a media that's owned by a handful of wealthy proprietors, almost all of whom live in Toronto and Montreal, and they do not provide. There are red lines they will not cross. I would describe the political spectrum in our media as all CNN with like a little bit of Rhino. That's it. It's all CNN. It's all card-carrying liberal, socialist, NDP type people, wokeists, and then here and there a smattering of what I would call Rhino public opinion, right? People who are not really conservative. They're just sort of like what they call themselves red Tories, right? That's like up here red is left and blue is conservative. We need Fox News, we need Sky News, and we need support. We need good production values, good news, hammering populist views up here in Canada, destroying these people. And the problem is that's illegal. In Canada, we have a direction to the CRTC called ineligibility of non-Canadians. So in England, USA, Australia, anywhere, anybody can own broadcast licenses and open up a channel in all of those countries, but not in Canada, right? In Canada, it says if you're not a Canadian, or if whoever's funding you is not a Canadian, you can't get a broadcast license. And Canada has a CRTC called the Canadian Radio and Television Commission that prevents anybody from having a cable channel if they're not part of the Canadian elite living in Toronto. I mean, they call it, unless you're a non-Canadian. Well, how many Canadians do you think could afford to own a cable company? Not that many. How many Canadians do you think do own a cable company? Like 4, 5? And who are these Canadians? Well, they're big Canadian corporations. And where do they live? Well, they live in Montreal and Toronto. And what are their political views? Well, they're the same as all the other liberals in Toronto and Montreal. So we're getting one point of view. There's a little bit of criticism of Trudeau, but it's very moderate. It's very moderate. All of our news is very moderate. Moderate meaning it's more liberal than it would be if it was run by me or run by Tucker Carlson or run by anyone in the Murdoch family. We need freedom, okay? Nothing we're doing with truckers or voting. We use Dominion voting machines in our elections. Okay? Non-citizens vote in our elections, even though it's illegal. We need help. We can't bring attention to these things. We can podcast all we like, but we need a populist media outlet here. We need the legacy media to surrender some time to some populist viewpoints, which they will not do. We need to address that. Okay? We need to do some polling and find out how many people support Donald Trump, Fox News, populist type views. Okay? Donald Trump and Fox News are the only outlet supporting populism in Canada, but it's in the United States and we have to go online to find it. or we have to pay to subscribe to it. People shouldn't have to pay a subscription to get populist news. It should be mandatory carry for the cable subscribers. That's how it works up here, right? The government, the CRTC, can say, oh, the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is far left, always supports the left, never supports Trump or the populists. And of course, the government gives it money to support it. And of course, it's sympathetic to the left and the government that provides it with support. And that is mandatory carry. Every single cable provider has to carry that left-wing mush. And nobody is required to carry Fox, and nobody does unless you pay money. You have to pay to subscribe to populism. You get socialism for free. That's not fair. That has to stop. Not in a year, not in 5 years, not after somebody wins an election. Right now. We need an hour on Global. We need an hour on CTV. We need an hour in prime time on the CBC. We need people like Maxime Bernier or other populists to have space on legacy media where they can explain their points of view, where they can have people that agree with them put on presentations, documentaries, whatever. We need a voice. We shouldn't have to hide on the internet. And if in fact, as I suspect, that 30% or so or 40% of Canadians have very populist views, particularly if they weren't being suppressed by the press and the government, if they could really understand the views and have access to Fox News and access to some of these Sky News presentations, I'm telling you, it's probably 30, 40%. Now, it could grow. And what we need is access to the legacy media. The legacy media has an inappropriate monopoly on trust. The legacy media has built up trust over decades, back when there was no such thing as the internet. They were the only purveyors of news, and they have this unfair advantage where they have consolidated a monopoly over information, and their political views and their biases, or their biases, are superimposed on all of us. And people who are populist, they don't get a chance to have a show, to have, a journalist standing in front of people on a legacy channel saying, Trudeau's a mental case and Maxime Bernier is great, fantastic, and here's why. We don't have anybody who's on a populist channel. We don't have anybody on a legacy channel who's even allowed to say anything positive about a populist. Okay? They don't. There's no positive commentary about Donald Trump on any Canadian channel. Okay? On none of them. They never say anything good. 98% of Canadians can't stand Trump. We wonder why. Because they don't get anything. Everything we hear in Canada is downstream from CNN. Nothing comes downstream from Fox. Fox doesn't exist in the Canadian media landscape unless you pay for it. We need Fox News and Sky News to help us broaden out the diversity of our media landscape. We need a quality broadcast, okay? Not some weird idiosyncratic, unprofessional infotainment type news, okay? Which is what we had a station called Sun News for a while, but it was very tabloid. It was polemical. It was extremely aggressive, and it was sort of like a vanity press for its proprietor, Ezra Levant. And I love Ezra. And I love the Western Standard when it was around, and I love the Rebel News. But what I'm saying is that product, the Rebel News and all that, that was completely discredited in the Canadian media, in the legacy media. Okay? Your average Canadian living in Toronto, Montreal, wherever, all they heard was how bad it was, and it was just right-wing crap. At the end of the day, we need quality product. We need professionalism. We need journalists who carefully choose their words, who don't overstate their case, who don't talk about hating Trudeau or, being hysterical. We need good, hard-hitting journalism from a reputable company. And that's illegal in Canada if you are a company that has your head offices outside of Canada. If it's a non-Canadian bankrolling it, it's illegal. But we don't have anybody here who can afford to bankroll what I would call a quality broadcast. There is nobody willing to do it. And they've made it illegal. Guess who did that? The Liberals. That's who did it. We need the Order in Council, it's SOR/97-192 under the Broadcasting Act. We need Tucker Carlson to hammer that. Hammer it, hammer it, hammer it. They've made populism illegal. They've made it impossible for populists. They've made it impossible for populists to get any help. I will happily, please, somebody make contact with me. I'm going to post a link. I own a law firm in Toronto. I'm involved in a lot of litigation arising from these lockdowns, arising from the attempt to suppress information about alternative COVID treatments, you name it. Okay? But I'm one person. We need support. Okay? And America has proven that when it pays attention to Canada and gives us a little bit of wind in our sails, we can take it from there. Okay? We need help from Fox News. This is a message to you, Tucker, and to anyone else listening, and the fine people on Sky who I love to watch, who I think are actually the best conservative broadcast out there, if you want to call it, the best truth broadcast I've ever seen. Please, somebody from Sky News, contact me. We need to take on SOR 97-192. And we need the Conservative Party of Canada, whoever the new leader is, Pierre Poilievre, if you're listening, please, we need a trucker protest outside of Parliament to get rid of SOR 97-192. Okay? We need this order in council removed. We need to have the right to be bankrolled by Australians, British, Americans who want to help us raise the profile of our populist voices. The fact that we don't have a rich populist bankrolling us here doesn't mean we should be silenced. The fact that all the TV stations are owned and run by people in Montreal and Toronto do not mean that we should not have a right to have a quality broadcast speaking our truths. We shouldn't have to be shut down and kowtow to people who live in Toronto and Montreal and prevented from having a proper broadcast. We shouldn't have to make billions of dollars in some separate business completely outside of the influence of the elites, and only then can we get a broadcast license. Because that's what that order means. It means unless you're rich and a billionaire, how are you going to start a broadcasting station? How are you going to start a network? You can't. It's designed to make sure that the only information Canadians hear are the opinions of people in Toronto and Montreal. And for those of us who live outside of Toronto and who like Fox News more than any other station in Canada, who despise the views of the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, who despise the ridiculously spun fake news of all of the Canadian media, who got everything wrong during COVID, who lie, who suppress news, who don't report news, do all the same things that CNN does routinely, who get their news downstream only from CNN, who get their information only downstream from liberal media outlets and never from Fox. We need pressure on the government in one form or another to immediately drop SOR 97-192. And then we need an emergency effort made by Sky and Fox or both to immediately come to our rescue and expand our broadcast landscape. And let Canadians, I agree, it should be Canadians on those shows. It should be Canadians writing the content. It should be the Canadians running the editorial content of such broadcast. But the money to support it, to get the license, to prepare the tech, that money can come from anywhere. If there's a profitable case to be made, and I think there is, because there's nobody on this landscape right now, I think people should be allowed to invest in Canada. If Australians like Rupert Murdoch were allowed to invest in newspapers and broadcasting in England, why can't they invest in it here? If Australians like the Murdoch clan can invest in Fox News in America, why can't they invest in Canadian news? And now I'm going to speak to Canadians. We need a new attitude about what our rights are. Our Constitution guarantees our rights. with very minimal limits. Only such limits as are reasonable and demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. Well, what that means is we demand that we have the same rights as Americans. You cannot justify a limitation on a right north of the border where there is no such limitation on that right south of the border. We should not set the watermark for our rights lower than America. They should be at least as broad as the rights enjoyed by Americans, certainly not any less. If there are rights that Americans don't have that we do, we should keep them. If there are rights that Americans do have that we don't, we must adopt them. There should be no right that any American has that a Canadian does not have. And no judge should ever interpret our Constitution in a way that gives us less rights than an American would have. We need a continent-wide attitude. We need a North American approach where our judges understand that if a right has been upheld in the United States, then it should be upheld here. And if there's a restriction of a right in the States that is not a restriction here, we should take the broadest interpretation and preserve our rights. Okay? Along with rights, there are responsibilities. Okay? Now is a time for Canadians to seize the moment. Right now, illegal non-Canadian votes are cast in our elections. Right now, Dominion voting machines are used in our elections. Now, I want to be clear so I don't get sued. I'm not saying that Dominion voting machines don't work. I'm saying I don't agree that any electronic voting machine should be allowed anywhere near any election in North America. There should be no technology involved in elections, and certainly no technology in which somebody can access the internet. There is only one standard: in-person, one-day elections, paper ballots, scrutinized by your adversaries. That's it. Anything less creates mistrust and destroys democracy. This is how it's always been done. This is how it should always be done, and it should particularly be the case during periods where people don't trust each other. We need anti-nepotism clauses. We need to bar the children and grandchildren of famous prime ministers and politicians from having any cabinet level position or above. If your daddy was the prime minister, you shouldn't be allowed to run. Both sides of the border, we're seeing these dynasties being created. People are talking about Michelle Obama as the next presidential candidate. No, Michelle Obama is only famous because people voted for her husband. The attention given to her is not earned. And because it's not earned, she should not be a candidate. We should not have the wives of former presidents running. That is an invitation for corruption, so that the people who can support one candidate can keep their investment paying off through their spouse, their children, on down the decades. Absolutely not. You're asking for trouble. We need anti-nepotism laws. We need term limits. We need rules that say that politicians can't get book deals and movie deals and line their pockets and have foundations. All of that should be illegal. They should leave office with the coat in their back and the money that their blind trust earned, with not a nickel given to them by foreign powers, not a penny. And to the extent that any of them have gotten rich through their foundations and other things and gifts and God knows what shady business deals, that should all be stripped away from them.